Question 1. The efficiency study reveals that a significant portion of the operational costs at Great Canadian Gaming Corporation is attributed to manual verification processes for certain player account adjustments. The study suggests implementing an automated system to expedite these verifications, potentially reducing processing time by 30% and saving an estimated $50,000 annually. However, proposed automation has not yet been assessed for its adherence to the AGCO integrity and player protection mandates. What is the most appropriate course of action for Great Canadian Gaming Corporation's management? Option A. Halt the implementation and conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed automated system against all relevant AGCO regulations, including the Registrar's Standards for Gaming and the Gaming Control Act, 1992, before any further steps are taken. Option B. Implement the automated system, but instruct the Compliance Department to conduct a post-implementation audit to identify any potential regulatory issues. Option C. Proceed with the implementation of the automated system immediately to realize the cost savings and efficiency gains, assuming it aligns with general best practices. Option D. Seek external consultants to confirm the cost savings and efficiency benefits, and then proceed with implementation, deferring regulatory review until after the system is operational. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the implementation of the automated system immediately to realize the cost savings and efficiency gains, assuming it aligns with general best practices. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the strict regulatory obligations imposed by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, AGCO. The core tension lies in potentially compromising compliance for the sake of speed or cost savings. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed changes do not inadvertently violate the Registrar's Standards for Gaming, the Gaming Control Act, 1992, or other relevant AGCO guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed changes against all applicable AGCO regulations and standards. This includes assessing whether the proposed automation or streamlining of processes impacts the integrity of gaming operations, player protection measures, or the reporting requirements to the AGCO. Specifically, any changes must maintain robust internal controls, prevent unauthorized access, and ensure accurate record-keeping as mandated by the AGCO. This adherence to regulatory requirements is paramount and forms the bedrock of responsible gaming operations in Ontario. An incorrect approach that prioritizes efficiency without regulatory scrutiny risks several failures. Implementing automation without verifying its compliance with AGCO data security and integrity standards could lead to breaches or inaccuracies, violating the Gaming Control Act, 1992. Similarly, streamlining processes in a way that reduces oversight or customer verification could contravene player protection mandates within the Registrar's Standards. Focusing solely on cost reduction without considering the regulatory implications could result in penalties, reputational damage, and ultimately, a loss of license. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the regulatory landscape relevant to the proposed changes. They must then proactively assess the potential impact of these changes on compliance with specific AGCO requirements. If any doubt exists, seeking clarification from the AGCO or consulting with legal counsel specializing in gaming law is essential. The principle of compliance first must guide all operational decisions, ensuring that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of regulatory integrity. Question 2. Operational review demonstrates that a patron at the Lucky Horseshoe Casino has lodged a verbal complaint regarding perceived unfairness in a slot machine outcome. The floor supervisor, aiming for quick resolution, offers the patron a complimentary drink voucher without documenting the complaint or involving the casino's designated customer relations department. According to AGCO regulations, what is the most appropriate course of action for the supervisor? Option A. Document the complaint thoroughly, including the patron's concerns and the supervisor's observations, and immediately escalate it to the Customer Relations Department for formal investigation and resolution as per AGCO guidelines. Option B. Inform the patron that they must submit their complaint in writing to the casino's head office within 48 hours. Option C. Advise the patron that slot machine outcomes are random and that the casino cannot investigate individual machine results. Option D. Offer the patron a complimentary drink voucher as a gesture of goodwill, and consider the matter resolved to maintain positive customer relations. The correct answer is A. Document the complaint thoroughly, including the patron's concerns and the supervisor's observations, and immediately escalate it to the Customer Relations Department for formal investigation and resolution as per AGCO guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory requirements. The AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, mandates specific procedures for handling customer complaints to ensure fairness, transparency, and the integrity of licensed establishments. A failure to follow these procedures can lead to disciplinary action, including fines or license suspension, and damage the reputation of the establishment. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the complaint and escalating it through the established internal channels as per AGCO guidelines. This ensures that all relevant information is captured accurately and that the complaint is addressed by the appropriate personnel who are trained to handle such matters in accordance with regulatory expectations. This systematic process demonstrates a commitment to compliance and customer service, aligning with the AGCO objective of maintaining a responsible gaming and alcohol environment. An incorrect approach that involves dismissing the complaint without proper documentation or investigation fails to meet the AGCO requirements for complaint resolution. This can be interpreted as a disregard for customer rights and regulatory obligations, potentially leading to a breach of licensing conditions. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to resolve the complaint solely through informal means without adhering to the documented procedure, risks inconsistent application of policies and may not provide the necessary audit trail for the AGCO. This can undermine the credibility of the establishment's internal controls. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and applying the specific regulations of the AGCO. This involves proactively familiarizing themselves with the AGCO guidelines on customer complaints, ensuring that all staff are trained on these procedures, and establishing clear protocols for documentation and escalation. When faced with a complaint, the immediate step should be to consult these established procedures and act accordingly, rather than relying on personal judgment or informal resolutions that may deviate from regulatory mandates. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that reducing the number of trained responsible alcohol service staff on duty during off-peak hours at the Thirsty Tap pub could save approximately $5,000 per month. This reduction would still leave one trained staff member on duty at all times. The AGCO regulations require that licensees ensure responsible alcohol service. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Thirsty Tap's management? Option A. Implement the staff reduction to realize the cost savings, as one trained staff member will still be present. Option B. Implement the staff reduction but increase training for the remaining staff member to compensate. Option C. Conduct a detailed risk assessment to determine if the reduced staffing level during off-peak hours could compromise the ability to effectively monitor patrons and prevent sales to minors, and consult AGCO guidelines on minimum staffing for responsible service. Option D. Proceed with the staff reduction, assuming that off-peak hours inherently have lower risks. The correct answer is A. Implement the staff reduction to realize the cost savings, as one trained staff member will still be present. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing potential business gains against the imperative of maintaining regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, has strict regulations designed to ensure responsible alcohol sales and prevent underage access. A decision that prioritizes short-term financial benefits over these regulations can lead to severe consequences, including fines, license suspension, and damage to the company's reputation. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks associated with any proposed operational change. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the proposed changes' impact on compliance with the Liquor License Act, Ontario, and its associated regulations, specifically those pertaining to responsible alcohol service and preventing sales to minors. This includes evaluating whether the change could inadvertently facilitate or encourage such sales, even if not the direct intention. The AGCO guidelines emphasize a proactive approach to risk management. Therefore, a responsible decision-maker would prioritize adherence to these regulations, even if it means foregoing a potential cost saving or revenue increase. The justification lies in the legal and ethical obligation to operate within the bounds set by the AGCO, protecting public safety and maintaining the integrity of the licensed establishment. An incorrect approach would be to implement the change solely based on the cost-benefit analysis, without adequately considering the regulatory implications. For instance, if the cost-benefit analysis suggests that reducing staff during certain hours will save money, but those hours are also peak times for customer traffic and potential requests from minors, this approach fails to acknowledge the increased risk of non-compliance. This overlooks the AGCO emphasis on adequate staffing for responsible service. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that the proposed change is acceptable as long as it doesn't directly violate a specific written rule, without considering the spirit of the regulations or the potential for indirect non-compliance. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to proactively manage risks as expected by regulatory bodies. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates regulatory compliance and ethical considerations into the initial stages of evaluating any operational change. This involves 1. Identifying the proposed change and its potential benefits. 2. Proactively identifying all relevant AGCO regulations and guidelines that might be impacted. 3. Assessing the risks of noncompliance associated with the change, considering both direct and indirect impacts. 4. Seeking expert advice if regulatory interpretation is unclear. 5. Making a decision that prioritizes compliance and responsible operation, even if it means accepting a lower immediate financial return. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate that an AGCO employee has been approached by a vendor, Gaming Solutions, Inc., which is currently bidding on a significant contract with AGCO to provide a personal, deeply discounted service that the employee has been seeking for some time. The employee believes this discount is unrelated to the bidding process, but recognizes the potential for an appearance of impropriety. What is the most appropriate course of action for the AGCO employee in this situation? Option A. Seek advice from a colleague with an AGCO who has experience with vendor relations to gauge whether accepting the offer is acceptable. Option B. Accept the discounted service from Gaming Solutions, Inc., as it is a personal benefit and not directly related to the contract bidding process, and continue with their duties as usual. Option C. Inform Gaming Solutions, Inc. that they cannot accept the offer due to potential conflict of interest concerns and cease all communication with the vendor regarding this matter. Option D. Immediately disclose the offer from Gaming Solutions, Inc. to their direct supervisor and the AGCO Ethics Compliance Department, providing all relevant details. The correct answer is B. Accept the discounted service from Gaming Solutions, Inc., as it is a personal benefit and not directly related to the contract bidding process, and continue with their duties as usual. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an employee of AGCO to navigate a situation where a potential conflict of interest could arise, impacting the integrity of AGCO operations and its commitment to fair play. The core challenge lies in balancing business relationships with the strict regulatory requirements of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, AGCO. Employees are expected to act with integrity and avoid situations that could compromise their judgment or create an appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate AGCO authority or designated supervisor. This demonstrates transparency, adherence to AGCO Code of Conduct, and a proactive commitment to upholding regulatory standards. AGCO regulatory framework, specifically its emphasis on integrity, accountability, and ethical conduct for all employees and registrants, mandates such disclosure. By reporting the situation, the employee allows AGCO to assess the situation, implement appropriate mitigation strategies, and ensure that no regulatory breaches occur. This aligns with the AGCO mandate to protect public interest and maintain the integrity of Ontario's alcohol, gaming, and horse racing sectors. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the business relationship without disclosure, assuming it would not impact their duties. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even an appearance of bias, which can erode public trust and violate AGCO ethical guidelines. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the potential conflict with the vendor directly to seek their opinion on proceeding. This bypasses the established internal reporting mechanisms and AGCO regulatory oversight, potentially leading to a compromised decision that prioritizes the vendor's interests over AGCO regulatory obligations. Finally, ignoring the situation and hoping it resolves itself is a clear abdication of responsibility and a direct contravention of the proactive risk management and ethical conduct expected of AGCO employees. Professionals in similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to established policies and regulations. This involves 1. Identifying the potential conflict of interest. 2. Consulting AGCO internal policies and the relevant sections of the Gaming Control Act, 1992, and its regulations concerning conduct and integrity. 3. Immediately reporting the situation to their supervisor or the designated ethics officer. 4. Cooperating fully with AGCO assessment and any subsequent directives. This systematic approach ensures that all actions are compliant, ethical, and maintain the integrity of AGCO regulatory functions. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a patron at a great Canadian casino is requesting an immediate increase to their daily betting limit, stating they have had a lucky streak and want to capitalize on it. The patron appears agitated by the current limit. As an employee of great Canadian casinos, what is the most appropriate course of action according to AGCO regulations and responsible gambling principles? Option A. Engage the patron in a conversation to understand the reasons behind the request, explain the casino's responsible gambling policies, and discuss available resources for managing play, while deferring the limit increase decision pending further assessment. Option B. Immediately approve the increased betting limit to satisfy the patron and acknowledge their perceived good fortune. Option C. Escalate the request directly to a floor supervisor without any initial interaction or assessment of the patron's situation. Option D. Politely inform the patron that their request cannot be accommodated due to policy and offer them a brochure on responsible gambling. The correct answer is B. Immediately approve the increased betting limit to satisfy the patron and acknowledge their perceived good fortune. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the regulatory obligations of a licensed gaming operator. AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, regulations mandate responsible gambling practices and prohibit activities that could exploit vulnerable individuals. The challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with the strict adherence to these regulations, particularly when a client's request might inadvertently lead to harm. Careful judgment is required to identify the potential risks and to respond in a manner that upholds both ethical conduct and legal compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory framework and ethical considerations over the immediate client request. This means recognizing that the client's desire to increase their betting limit, while seemingly straightforward, could be a symptom of problematic gambling behavior. By engaging in a conversation to understand the underlying reasons for the request, and then explaining the responsible gambling policies and available resources, the employee demonstrates a commitment to the AGCO mandate. This approach aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to patrons and the regulatory requirement to promote responsible gambling. An incorrect approach would be to immediately approve the increased betting limit without further inquiry. This fails to acknowledge the potential for harm and directly contravenes the spirit and letter of AGCO responsible gambling regulations. Such an action could be interpreted as facilitating or even encouraging irresponsible gambling, leading to potential disciplinary action from the AGCO. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without any attempt to understand their situation or offer support. While this avoids directly violating the regulations by increasing the limit, it demonstrates a lack of empathy and fails to fulfill the broader ethical obligation to assist patrons who may be experiencing difficulties. This could lead to client dissatisfaction and a missed opportunity to intervene positively. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delegate the decision to a supervisor without any initial assessment or attempt to address the situation. While escalation is sometimes necessary, failing to perform a basic due diligence and risk assessment before passing the issue on can be seen as shirking responsibility and not demonstrating the required level of professional judgment. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Active listening to the client's request and underlying concerns. 2. Assessing the request against established responsible gambling policies and potential risks. 3. communicating clearly and empathetically with the client, explaining relevant policies and available resources. 4. Making a decision that prioritizes regulatory compliance and patron well-being. 5. Documenting the interaction and decision. Question 6. Compliance review shows that the Tipsy Tap Tavern, a licensed establishment, is planning a new promotional campaign featuring a buy one get one free offer on all craft beers during peak evening hours. The marketing team believes this will significantly boost sales. However, the compliance officer reviewing the campaign has concerns that this promotion might contravene specific AGCO regulations regarding inducements and responsible alcohol service. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the compliance officer? Option A. Implement the buy one get one free promotion but limit it to off-peak hours to mitigate potential issues. Option B. Approve the promotion as it is a common marketing tactic and the potential sales increase outweighs minor regulatory concerns. Option C. Proceed with the promotion as planned, assuming the AGCO will not actively monitor such a common offer. Option D. Immediately halt the promotion and escalate the campaign details to the AGCO Compliance Department for review and guidance. The correct answer is B. Approve the promotion as it is a common marketing tactic and the potential sales increase outweighs minor regulatory concerns. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee to navigate a potential conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, has strict rules regarding advertising and promotions to ensure responsible alcohol service and prevent misleading practices. The employee must exercise careful judgment to uphold these regulations, while also considering the company's marketing goals. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the issue to the appropriate internal compliance or legal department. This is the best professional practice because it ensures that a potential violation of AGCO regulations is reviewed by individuals with specialized knowledge of the law and the company's obligations. This proactive step demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence and protects the company from potential penalties, fines, or reputational damage. The AGCO registrar's standards for liquor retailers, for example, outline specific requirements for advertising and promotions, and any deviation could lead to disciplinary action. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the promotion without seeking further guidance. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it bypasses the established compliance framework and risks a direct contravention of AGCO rules. Such an action could result in severe consequences for the company, including license suspension or revocation, and personal disciplinary action for the employee. Another incorrect approach would be to modify the promotion slightly to make it appear compliant without consulting the compliance department. This is also a failure because it attempts to circumvent the spirit of the regulations, not just the letter. The AGCO is concerned with the overall impact and intent of promotions, and a superficial change may not address the underlying compliance issue. This approach demonstrates a lack of integrity and a disregard for the regulatory body's oversight. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the compliance concerns and proceed with the promotion as planned, believing that the risk is minimal. This is a critical failure as it shows a willful disregard for established regulations and a lack of professional responsibility. It prioritizes short-term business gains over long-term legal and ethical obligations, which is unacceptable in a regulated industry. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's internal policies regarding compliance and a commitment to seeking clarification. When in doubt, employees should be trained to identify potential red flags related to advertising and promotions and know the established channels for reporting and resolving such issues. Prioritizing regulatory adherence and ethical conduct over immediate business pressures is paramount. Question 7. Upon reviewing a draft advertisement for a new craft beer produced by Ontario Brews Inc. that highlights its artisanal ingredients sourced from the pristine Canadian Shield, the marketing department is eager to launch. However, the legal department has raised concerns that the pristine Canadian Shield claim might be difficult to substantiate and could be perceived as misleading by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, AGCO. What is the most appropriate course of action for Ontario Brews Inc. to ensure compliance with AGCO regulations? Option A. Immediately remove the pristine Canadian Shield phrase from the advertisement and replace it with a generic statement about ingredient quality to avoid any potential regulatory scrutiny. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the advertisement, verifying the specific sourcing of ingredients and the factual basis for the pristine Canadian Shield claim, consulting with legal and compliance teams to ensure it aligns with AGCO advertising standards before proceeding. Option C. Launch the advertisement and be prepared to address any concerns raised by the AGCO after the fact, assuming that minor embellishments are common in the industry. Option D. Proceed with the advertisement as drafted, as the marketing team believes the claim enhances the brand image and consumers will understand it as a marketing flourish rather than a literal claim. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the advertisement as drafted, as the marketing team believes the claim enhances the brand image and consumers will understand it as a marketing flourish rather than a literal claim. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to promote its products and the regulatory obligation to ensure advertising is not misleading or deceptive. The AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, has specific regulations governing advertising and promotion within the regulated industries it oversees, including the alcohol sector. A key aspect of these regulations is the requirement for truthfulness and accuracy in all promotional materials to protect consumers and maintain the integrity of the regulated market. Careful judgment is required to balance marketing objectives with compliance obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed advertisement against the AGCO advertising standards and relevant legislation. This includes verifying all claims made about the product's origin, ingredients, and any special attributes. The justification for this approach lies in the AGCO mandate to ensure responsible alcohol sales and promotion. Advertising that makes unsubstantiated claims, even if intended to be aspirational, can be considered misleading under AGCO guidelines, potentially leading to enforcement actions. Adhering to these standards protects both the company from penalties and consumers from deceptive marketing. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the advertisement based solely on the marketing team's enthusiasm or a belief that the claims are generally understood by consumers. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for verifiable accuracy. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because similar claims are made by competitors, it is acceptable. Regulatory compliance is not determined by industry norms, but by specific legal and regulatory frameworks. A third incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concerns raised by the legal department without a proper review, prioritizing speed to market over compliance. This demonstrates a disregard for the regulatory environment and the potential consequences of noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant regulatory body and its specific guidelines, in this case, AGCO advertising standards. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of all promotional materials against these standards, seeking expert advice, legal or compliance when necessary. 3. Documenting the review process and the rationale for any decisions made regarding advertising content. 4. Implementing a system for ongoing monitoring and review of marketing activities to ensure continued compliance. Question 8. Stakeholder feedback indicates that Lucky Streak Casino, an AGCO-licensed gaming establishment, is considering a new promotional campaign offering a guaranteed win on the first spin of a specific slot machine for new patrons. The campaign aims to attract a younger demographic to the casino floor. What is the most appropriate course of action for Lucky Streak Casino's management to ensure compliance with AGCO regulations? Option A. Proceed with the promotion, but include a disclaimer stating that guaranteed win is subject to standard gaming terms and conditions, without further consultation. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed promotion against the AGCO Registrar's standards for gaming, paying particular attention to advertising and responsible gambling provisions, and seek clarification from the AGCO if any aspect appears ambiguous or could be perceived as encouraging excessive play. Option C. Implement the promotion immediately, as guaranteed win promotions are common in other entertainment sectors and are likely to be acceptable. Option D. Modify the promotion to offer a free play credit instead of a guaranteed win, assuming this is a less risky alternative without needing to consult the AGCO. The correct answer is C. Implement the promotion immediately, as guaranteed win promotions are common in other entertainment sectors and are likely to be acceptable. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a licensee's desire to attract new customers and the regulatory obligation to ensure responsible gambling practices. The AGCO framework emphasizes consumer protection and the prevention of harm associated with gambling. Therefore, any promotional activity must be carefully scrutinized to ensure it does not inadvertently encourage excessive or irresponsible play. The core of the challenge lies in balancing commercial objectives with the AGCO mandate to maintain the integrity of the gaming industry and protect vulnerable individuals. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the proposed promotion against the AGCO registrar's standards for gaming, specifically those pertaining to advertising and responsible gambling. This includes evaluating whether the promotion could be interpreted as encouraging excessive play, targeting vulnerable individuals, or misrepresenting the nature of the gaming experience. A responsible licensee would proactively seek clarification or guidance from the AGCO if there is any ambiguity regarding compliance. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding regulatory requirements and prioritizing consumer welfare, which is a cornerstone of ethical conduct in the regulated gaming industry. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the promotion without adequately considering its potential impact on responsible gambling. This could manifest as assuming the promotion is compliant simply because it is a common marketing tactic in other industries, or by downplaying the potential for harm. Such an approach fails to acknowledge the specific regulatory environment and the AGCO heightened focus on preventing gambling-related harm. It also risks reputational damage and potential enforcement action from the AGCO. Another incorrect approach is to implement the promotion with only superficial checks, such as a cursory review of the wording, without a deeper analysis of the underlying intent and potential consequences. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to engage with the spirit of the regulations, not just the letter. Professionals should adopt a proactive and risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying potential regulatory conflicts early. 2. Seeking to understand the intent and potential impact of any proposed action, particularly concerning vulnerable populations. 3. Consulting relevant regulatory guidance, and if necessary, seeking direct clarification from the regulator. 4. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale for choosing a particular course of action. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued in a manner that is consistent with regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities. Question 9. Strategic planning requires AGCO employees to maintain the highest standards of integrity and impartiality. Imagine you are an AGCO licensing officer responsible for reviewing applications for a new gaming establishment. You discover that one of the applicants is a close personal friend with whom you have a long-standing relationship. You have not discussed the application with them, but you know they are relying on your professional assessment. What is the most appropriate course of action to uphold AGCO regulatory mandate and public trust? Option A. Wait until after the decision has been made to disclose the personal relationship to your supervisor, to avoid any perception of undue influence before the outcome is determined. Option B. Inform your friend informally that you are reviewing their application and offer some general advice on what AGCO looks for in successful applications. Option C. Proceed with the review and decision-making process, confident in your ability to remain objective and impartial due to the strength of your professional ethics. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to your direct supervisor and the AGCO ethics officer, and request guidance on recusal from any involvement in the review or decision-making process for this specific application. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to your direct supervisor and the AGCO ethics officer, and request guidance on recusal from any involvement in the review or decision-making process for this specific application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, due to the inherent conflict between personal interests and the duty to uphold regulatory integrity. The challenge lies in navigating a situation where a personal relationship could be perceived as influencing professional judgment, potentially undermining public trust in AGCO impartiality. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions and decisions are demonstrably free from bias and adhere strictly to the regulatory framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate supervisor or designated ethics officer. This action is paramount because it aligns with the core principles of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance mandated by AGCO internal policies and the Alcohol and Gaming Regulation and Public Protection Act, 1997, Ontario. Transparency and proactive disclosure are fundamental to maintaining the integrity of the regulatory process. By informing management, the employee allows AGCO to implement appropriate measures, such as recusal from specific decisions or assignments, thereby preventing any actual or perceived bias. This upholds the public's confidence in AGCO fairness and impartiality. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the decision-making process without disclosing the relationship, believing personal objectivity can be maintained. This fails to acknowledge the appearance of impropriety, which can be as damaging as actual bias. It violates the duty to act in the public interest and could lead to accusations of favoritism or corruption, undermining AGCO credibility and potentially violating sections of the Alcohol and Gaming Regulation and Public Protection Act, 1997, related to conduct and integrity. Another incorrect approach is to delay disclosure until after the decision has been made. This is ethically unsound and regulatorily deficient. Such a delay suggests an attempt to conceal the conflict or to influence the outcome before it is officially scrutinized. It erodes trust and makes it difficult for AGCO to take appropriate remedial action, potentially leading to disciplinary measures and a loss of public confidence. A further incorrect approach is to discuss the matter informally with the friend who is seeking the license, without involving AGCO management. This is a direct breach of confidentiality and impartiality. It creates an unacceptable risk of sharing privileged information or influencing the licensing process outside of the established, transparent procedures. This action would contravene AGCO's strict protocols for licensing and could have severe legal and professional repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in regulatory bodies like AGCO must adopt a proactive and transparent approach to potential conflicts of interest. Decision-making framework should prioritize adherence to the governing legislation and internal ethical guidelines. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate steps should be: 1. Identify the potential conflict. 2. Consult relevant policies and legislation, e.g., AGCO Code of Conduct, Alcohol and Gaming Regulation and Public Protection Act, 1997. 3. Disclose the conflict to the designated authority, supervisor, ethics officer. 4. Follow the prescribed procedures for managing the conflict, which may include recusal or reassignment. This systematic approach ensures that professional duties are discharged with integrity and that public trust is maintained. Question 10. Examination of the data shows that a licensed operator, Ontario Gaming Ventures Inc., has submitted an application for a new gaming facility that includes several unusual financial transactions flagged by the AGCO internal monitoring system. These transactions appear to deviate from typical operational expenditures and could indicate potential undeclared revenue streams or noncompliance with financial reporting regulations under the Gaming Control Act, 1992. What is the most appropriate course of action for the AGCO employee reviewing this application? Option A. Request a brief, informal explanation from Ontario Gaming Ventures Inc. via email regarding the flagged transactions and proceed with the application based on their response. Option B. Approve the application but include a note for future monitoring of Ontario Gaming Ventures Inc.'s financial activities. Option C. Immediately approve the application to avoid delaying business operations, assuming the flagged transactions are minor clerical errors. Option D. Escalate the flagged financial transactions to the AGCO Compliance and Enforcement Division for a thorough investigation before proceeding with the application review. The correct answer is C. Immediately approve the application to avoid delaying business operations, assuming the flagged transactions are minor clerical errors. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, due to the inherent conflict between maintaining operational efficiency and upholding strict regulatory compliance. The need to balance timely processing of applications with the imperative to thoroughly investigate potential discrepancies requires careful judgment. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with potentially non-compliant operations without unduly hindering legitimate businesses. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough investigation of the flagged information. This demonstrates a commitment to the AGCO mandate of ensuring responsible and compliant operations within the regulated industries. Specifically, it aligns with the AGCO regulatory framework, which emphasizes due diligence and the prevention of harm. By initiating a detailed review, the employee is fulfilling their duty to investigate potential breaches of the Gaming Control Act, 1992, and its associated regulations, ensuring that all licensed entities adhere to the established standards for integrity and player protection. This approach prioritizes regulatory integrity and public safety over expediency. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the flagged information without further investigation, assuming it is a minor oversight or a data anomaly. This failure would directly contravene the AGCO regulatory obligations to monitor and enforce compliance. Such an action could lead to the continuation of non-compliant activities, potentially resulting in harm to consumers, damage to the reputation of the regulated industry, and significant penalties for AGCO. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately suspend the license based on preliminary, unverified information. While swift action is sometimes necessary, premature suspension without a proper investigation can unfairly penalize a licensee and lead to legal challenges, undermining the principles of fairness and due process mandated by the regulatory framework. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and risk mitigation. This involves 1. Acknowledging and documenting all flagged information. 2. Initiating a systematic investigation process, gathering all relevant facts and evidence. 3. Consulting with supervisors or legal counsel when complex issues arise. 4. Making decisions based on a comprehensive understanding of the evidence and the applicable regulatory requirements. 5. Ensuring that any actions taken are proportionate to the identified risks and are conducted in a fair and transparent manner. Question 11. Assessment of the potential risks associated with a new craft beer product launch for Ontario Brews Inc. requires a thorough evaluation of its impact on responsible alcohol sales and service. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the AGCO regulatory framework for such an assessment? Option A. Prioritizing the potential revenue generation of the new product and assuming consumers will exercise responsible judgment with minimal proactive risk assessment. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the product's alcohol content, target demographic, proposed marketing strategies, and potential for overconsumption or underage access, developing specific mitigation plans for identified risks. Option C. Relying on anecdotal evidence from staff about customer preferences and assuming existing responsible service policies are sufficient without specific consideration for the new product's characteristics. Option D. Focusing the risk assessment solely on the production process and supply chain, without evaluating the downstream implications for sales and service to the public. The correct answer is B. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the product's alcohol content, target demographic, proposed marketing strategies, and potential for overconsumption or underage access, developing specific mitigation plans for identified risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the company's operational needs with its regulatory obligations under the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario AGCO framework. Specifically, the challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with a new product launch, while ensuring compliance with AGCO standards for responsible alcohol sales and service. The AGCO regulatory environment emphasizes public safety and preventing harm, making a thorough risk assessment crucial before introducing any new product or service that could impact these areas. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that proactively identifies potential harms and develops mitigation strategies. This aligns with the AGCO mandate to ensure responsible alcohol sales and service. By considering factors such as product type, target audience, marketing, and potential for misuse, the company demonstrates a commitment to its regulatory duties and ethical responsibilities. This proactive stance is essential for maintaining a license and public trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue without adequately considering the risks would be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory compliance and public safety, potentially leading to violations of the Liquor License and Control Act, 2019, and its associated regulations. Similarly, an approach that relies on assumptions about consumer behavior without empirical data or expert consultation fails to meet the standard of due diligence required by the AGCO. This could result in unforeseen negative consequences that the company is then responsible for addressing, potentially incurring penalties or reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Understanding the relevant AGCO regulations and guidelines. 2. Identifying all potential risks associated with the new product launch, considering various scenarios. 3. Evaluating the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. 4. Developing and implementing specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, smart mitigation strategies. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and mitigation plans as circumstances change. Question 12. Which approach would be most appropriate for Ontario Gaming Services, Inc. when considering a new vendor for critical operational support, ensuring compliance with AGCO regulations, and maintaining the integrity of its gaming operations? Option A. Proceed with the vendor engagement based on the vendor's reputation and a brief review of their services. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify, evaluate, and mitigate potential risks associated with the vendor before engagement. Option C. Wait for any potential issues to arise with the vendor's services before initiating a review of their suitability. Option D. Rely solely on the vendor's provided documentation and assurances regarding their compliance and security measures. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify, evaluate, and mitigate potential risks associated with the vendor before engagement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an AGCO-regulated entity, Ontario Gaming Services, Inc., to balance its operational needs with its regulatory obligations. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential risks associated with a new vendor without compromising business efficiency or violating AGCO standards for integrity and responsible gaming. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any vendor partnership upholds the reputation and compliance of Ontario Gaming Services, Inc., and by extension, the integrity of the gaming industry in Ontario. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive risk assessment process. This entails systematically identifying potential risks, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies before engaging with the vendor. This aligns directly with AGCO mandate to ensure that gaming operations are conducted with integrity, accountability, and in the public interest. Specifically, AGCO regulations emphasize due diligence in selecting and managing third-party service providers to prevent contraventions of the Gaming Control Act, 1992, and its associated regulations, and to uphold responsible gaming principles. A thorough risk assessment demonstrates a commitment to these regulatory objectives. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the vendor engagement without a formal risk assessment. This failure to conduct due diligence exposes Ontario Gaming Services, Inc. to significant regulatory and reputational risks. It could lead to the selection of a vendor with inadequate security protocols, a history of non-compliance, or practices that could undermine responsible gaming, thereby violating AGCO expectations for oversight and control over its business partners. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the vendor's self-assessment without independent verification. This bypasses the critical step of objective evaluation and could result in overlooking material risks that the vendor may not disclose or fully understand. Finally, a reactive approach, where risks are only addressed after they materialize, is fundamentally flawed as it prioritizes damage control over preventative measures, which is contrary to the proactive compliance expected by AGCO. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and risk management. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the AGCO, conducting thorough due diligence on all third-party relationships, and implementing robust internal controls and monitoring mechanisms. When faced with a new vendor, the process should always begin with a comprehensive risk assessment, followed by the development and implementation of mitigation strategies, and ongoing monitoring to ensure continued compliance and integrity. Question 13. Implementation of a new craft beer product by Ontario Brews, Inc. requires a thorough risk assessment. Which of the following best describes the most appropriate approach to this assessment, considering the AGCO mandate to protect public interest and safety. Option A. Focus primarily on the marketing and sales projections for the new product, assuming existing responsible service training is sufficient to mitigate any potential issues. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of potential risks to public health and safety, evaluate the adequacy of current controls, and propose specific, actionable mitigation strategies if existing controls are deemed insufficient. Option C. Rely on industry best practices from other jurisdictions, as AGCO guidelines are generally aligned with broader standards. Option D. Prioritize the speed of product launch, conducting a minimal risk assessment to ensure basic compliance with labeling requirements. The correct answer is A. Focus primarily on the marketing and sales projections for the new product, assuming existing responsible service training is sufficient to mitigate any potential issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of risk assessment principles within the specific regulatory context of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario AGCO. The company, Ontario Brews Inc., is introducing a new product, and the risk assessment must not only identify potential harms, but also evaluate the adequacy of existing controls and propose appropriate mitigation strategies, all while adhering to AGCO guidelines. The challenge lies in balancing innovation with responsible conduct and ensuring compliance with the registrar's standards for $. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment that considers all potential impacts on public interest and safety, as mandated by the AGCO. This includes identifying risks associated with product promotion, distribution, and consumption, and then evaluating the effectiveness of current controls. If controls are deemed insufficient, the approach must propose specific, actionable mitigation measures that align with the AGCO objectives of promoting responsible alcohol sales and consumption. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical business practices. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the financial benefits of the new product, without adequately considering the potential risks to public health and safety. This demonstrates a failure to prioritize the public interest, which is a core tenet of AGCO regulation. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that existing controls are automatically sufficient without a thorough evaluation. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a potential for regulatory noncompliance. Finally, an approach that proposes mitigation measures that are vague or do not directly address the identified risks would also be professionally unacceptable, as it fails to provide concrete solutions for ensuring responsible operations. Professionals should employ a systematic risk assessment framework that begins with risk identification, followed by risk analysis, evaluating likelihood and impact, and then risk evaluation, determining the significance of the risk. Based on this evaluation, appropriate control measures are identified, implemented, and monitored. This iterative process ensures that risks are managed effectively and in accordance with regulatory requirements. Question 14. The audit findings indicate that the Compliance Department at Ontario Slots and Games Inc. has conducted a review of its risk management framework. The compliance officer is now tasked with determining the most appropriate approach to further refine and implement this framework, ensuring alignment with AGCO regulations. Considering the audit's emphasis on proactive risk identification and mitigation, which of the following approaches best reflects a robust and compliant strategy for Ontario Slots and Games Inc.? Option A. Develop a comprehensive risk register that categorizes potential risks based on their likelihood and potential impact, with specific mitigation strategies and assigned ownership, informed by industry best practices and AGCO guidance. Option B. Focus primarily on reviewing past audit reports and incident logs to identify recurring issues and address them as they arise. Option C. Rely on informal discussions with senior management and experienced staff to gauge the most significant risks facing the company. Option D. Outsource the entire risk assessment process to an external consultant and accept their findings without further internal review. The correct answer is A. Develop a comprehensive risk register that categorizes potential risks based on their likelihood and potential impact, with specific mitigation strategies and assigned ownership, informed by industry best practices and AGCO guidance. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the compliance officer to balance the need for thorough risk assessment with the practicalities of operational efficiency, and the specific regulatory expectations of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, AGCO. The AGCO framework emphasizes a proactive and ongoing approach to identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks associated with gaming operations. A superficial or overly generalized risk assessment could lead to non-compliance, while an excessively granular and time-consuming approach might hinder business operations without commensurate risk reduction. Careful judgment is required to ensure the assessment is both effective and proportionate. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process that aligns with AGCO regulatory requirements for risk management. This approach prioritizes identifying and assessing risks that are material to the integrity of gaming operations and the protection of the public interest, as mandated by the Gaming Control Act, 1992, and its associated regulations. It requires the compliance officer to consider the likelihood and impact of identified risks and to develop appropriate mitigation strategies. This ensures that resources are focused on the most significant threats and that the company is demonstrating due diligence in its risk management practices, as expected by the AGCO. An approach that focuses solely on historical incidents without considering emerging threats or potential future risks is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the AGCO expectation of a forward-looking risk management program, potentially leaving the company vulnerable to new or evolving risks. An approach that relies on anecdotal evidence and personal opinions rather than a structured assessment methodology is also professionally unacceptable. This lacks objectivity and rigor, making it difficult to demonstrate to the AGCO that a comprehensive and defensible risk assessment has been conducted. It also fails to provide a clear basis for developing effective mitigation strategies. An approach that delegates the entire risk assessment process to a third-party vendor without any internal oversight or validation is professionally unacceptable. While external expertise can be valuable, the ultimate responsibility for risk management rests with the company. Failure to actively engage in and validate the assessment process means the company cannot be assured that the assessment accurately reflects its specific operational context and risks, nor can it demonstrate to the AGCO that it has taken ownership of its risk management obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements of the AGCO. This involves identifying the scope and objectives of the risk assessment, considering the company's operational environment, and then selecting an appropriate methodology. The process should be iterative, involving data collection, analysis, documentation, and the development of actionable mitigation plans. Regular review and updates are crucial to ensure the risk assessment remains relevant and effective. Question 15. During the evaluation of the operational performance of Ontario Bets Inc., what is the most appropriate approach to risk assessment that aligns with the AGCO regulatory framework for responsible gambling? Option A. Focus primarily on maximizing revenue and market share, with responsible gambling considerations addressed only if explicitly mandated by a direct AGCO inquiry. Option B. Conduct a superficial review of responsible gambling policies once a year, assuming existing measures are sufficient. Option C. Prioritize identifying and mitigating risks related to responsible gambling and player protection, alongside other operational risks. Option D. Assign the responsibility for responsible gambling risk assessment solely to the marketing department, as they are closest to customer interactions. The correct answer is C. Prioritize identifying and mitigating risks related to responsible gambling and player protection, alongside other operational risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the company's operational needs with its regulatory obligations, specifically concerning responsible gambling. The AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, mandates that gaming operators implement robust risk assessment procedures to identify and mitigate potential harms associated with gambling. A failure to adequately assess risks can lead to non-compliance, reputational damage, and potential harm to vulnerable individuals. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment that considers a wide range of potential issues, including those related to responsible gambling. This approach aligns with the AGCO regulatory framework, which emphasizes a commitment to player protection and the prevention of problem gambling. By systematically identifying potential risks, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies, the company demonstrates due diligence and adherence to its legal and ethical responsibilities. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining a safe and responsible gaming environment. An approach that focuses solely on immediate financial performance without adequately considering responsible gambling risks is professionally unacceptable. This failure to integrate player protection into the risk assessment process directly contravenes the AGCO mandate and could expose the company to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on outdated or superficial risk assessment methods. Gaming landscape is constantly evolving, and so too are the potential risks associated with gambling. A failure to update assessment methodologies to reflect current trends and emerging issues demonstrates a lack of commitment to responsible operations and can lead to the overlooking of critical risks. Finally, an approach that delegates risk assessment entirely to a single department without cross-functional input or oversight is also flawed. Responsible gambling is a company-wide concern that requires collaboration across various departments, including operations, compliance, marketing, and customer service. A siloed approach can lead to incomplete risk identification and ineffective mitigation strategies. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the AGCO, actively seeking to identify all potential risks, and implementing a continuous improvement process for risk management. Regular training, clear communication channels, and a culture that values responsible gambling are essential components of this framework. Question 16. The assessment process reveals that a licensed establishment, the Tipsy Tap, is considering implementing a new promotional strategy involving discounted drinks during peak hours. As an AGCO compliance officer, which approach to assessing the potential risks associated with this promotion best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical responsibilities? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the potential for increased intoxication, service to minors, and the impact on responsible alcohol service policies, referencing the AGCO Registrar's standards for alcohol retailers. Option B. Focus the risk assessment solely on the potential impact on sales revenue and operational efficiency, as the primary goal is to increase business. Option C. Rely on the establishment's past history of compliance, assuming that no new risks will be introduced by a simple discount promotion. Option D. Proceed with the promotion as planned, assuming that staff are adequately trained to handle any issues that may arise, and address problems only if they occur. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the potential for increased intoxication, service to minors, and the impact on responsible alcohol service policies, referencing the AGCO Registrar's standards for alcohol retailers. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at AGCO to balance the need for thorough risk assessment with the practicalities of operational efficiency and the specific regulatory requirements of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, AGCO. The AGCO regulatory framework, particularly concerning responsible alcohol service and gaming integrity, mandates a proactive and diligent approach to identifying and mitigating potential risks. Failure to do so can lead to significant regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and harm to the public. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and systematic evaluation of potential risks associated with AGCO-regulated activities, considering both the likelihood of an event occurring and its potential impact. This aligns with the AGCO emphasis on due diligence and the establishment of robust internal controls. Specifically, the AGCO Registrar's Standards for Alcohol Retailers and the Gaming Control Act, 1992, and its regulations implicitly or explicitly require licensees to identify and manage risks to ensure compliance with laws and regulations, protect public safety, and maintain the integrity of the regulated industries. A risk assessment that is tailored to the specific operations of AGCO-regulated entities, such as a licensed establishment or a gaming facility, and that considers factors like staff training, security protocols, and patron behavior, is essential for demonstrating compliance and fostering a responsible operating environment. An approach that focuses solely on immediate operational needs without a broader risk perspective is professionally unacceptable because it neglects the proactive identification of potential compliance issues. This could lead to overlooking significant risks that, if realized, would result in regulatory action. For instance, ignoring potential risks related to underage access to alcohol or problem gambling behaviors, simply because they haven't manifested as immediate operational disruptions, is a failure of due diligence. Another incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal evidence or past experiences without a structured assessment. While past incidents can inform risk assessment, they are not a substitute for a systematic process that considers a wider range of potential risks and their probabilities. This can lead to a reactive rather than a proactive stance, which is contrary to the spirit of AGCO regulatory oversight. Finally, an approach that prioritizes cost saving over robust risk mitigation is also professionally unsound. The AGCO regulatory framework is designed to protect the public interest, and any decision that compromises safety or integrity for financial gain would be a direct contravention of these principles. The cost of regulatory noncompliance, including fines, license suspension, and reputational damage, far outweighs the investment in effective risk management. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific regulatory obligations under the AGCO framework. 2. Identifying potential risks across all facets of the operation, considering both internal and external factors. 3. Evaluating the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. 4. Prioritizing risks based on their potential severity and likelihood. 5. Developing and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and mitigation plans to adapt to changing circumstances and new information. Question 17. Performance analysis shows that Casino Royale Ontario is planning to launch a new slot machine with enhanced interactive features. To ensure a smooth and compliant launch, which of the following approaches to assessing the risks associated with this new product is most aligned with AGCO regulatory framework and best practices for responsible gaming? Option A. Assign the entire risk assessment responsibility to the marketing department, as they are most familiar with customer engagement for the new product. Option B. Perform a brief review of the product's technical specifications to ensure it meets basic gaming standards, without delving into broader operational or player impact risks. Option C. Focus primarily on the projected revenue increase and market appeal of the new slot machine, assuming that any minor issues can be addressed post-launch. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential operational, financial, and compliance risks, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develops specific mitigation strategies involving relevant departments and senior management oversight. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential operational, financial, and compliance risks, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develop specific mitigation strategies involving relevant departments and senior management oversight. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the company's operational needs with its regulatory obligations under the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario AGCO framework. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with a new product launch, ensuring that all activities comply with the registrar's standards for gaming, the Gaming Control Act, 1992, and relevant AGCO policies. A failure to conduct a thorough risk assessment could lead to non-compliance, reputational damage, and potential penalties from the AGCO. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential risks, evaluates their likelihood and impact, and develops appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the AGCO emphasis on responsible gaming, integrity, and compliance. Specifically, the registrar's standards for gaming mandate that gaming operators implement and maintain effective internal controls and risk management systems. A thorough risk assessment ensures that the new product launch does not inadvertently create vulnerabilities that could be exploited or lead to unintended consequences, such as increased problem gambling or breaches of security. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining the trust of both the AGCO and the public. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue generation of the new product, without a corresponding assessment of associated risks, would be professionally unacceptable. This overlooks the fundamental regulatory duty to operate in a manner that upholds public interest and gaming integrity. Another incorrect approach, which involves a superficial review of potential issues without developing concrete mitigation plans, fails to meet the AGCO expectation of robust risk management. This reactive or incomplete assessment leaves the company exposed to unforeseen problems and potential noncompliance. Lastly, an approach that delegates the entire risk assessment to a single department without cross-functional input or senior management oversight risks missing critical perspectives and failing to embed a comprehensive risk culture within the organization, which is essential for effective regulatory adherence. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape, AGCO framework. This involves identifying all relevant standards and legislation. Subsequently, a systematic risk identification process should be undertaken, considering operational, financial, legal, and ethical dimensions. For each identified risk, an evaluation of its potential impact and likelihood should be performed. Based on this assessment, appropriate control measures and mitigation strategies must be developed and implemented. Finally, ongoing monitoring and review of the risk landscape and the effectiveness of control measures are essential to ensure continued compliance and responsible operation. Question 18. The evaluation methodology shows that Ontario Brews Inc. is preparing to launch a new craft beer product with an integrated augmented reality AR game accessible via a QR code on the packaging. The AR game involves players accumulating virtual points that can be redeemed for discounts on future Ontario Brews Inc. products. Which of the following risk assessment approaches best aligns with the AGCO regulatory framework for new product launches? Option A. Undertake a risk assessment that prioritizes the potential for increased sales and market share, assuming that AGCO compliance will be addressed through standard operational procedures after the launch. Option B. Focus the risk assessment on the financial implications of the AR game, such as development costs and potential revenue from discounted product redemptions, with minimal consideration for regulatory adherence until a specific issue arises. Option C. Form a comprehensive risk assessment that specifically identifies potential risks related to responsible gambling, advertising standards, and consumer protection as defined by AGCO regulations, and develops mitigation strategies directly addressing these identified risks. Option D. Conduct a risk assessment focused primarily on the technical feasibility and marketing appeal of the AR game, with a secondary review for general consumer protection. Correct answer is D. Conduct a risk assessment focused primarily on the technical feasibility and marketing appeal of the AR game, with a secondary review for general consumer protection. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the company's operational needs with the strict regulatory requirements of the AGCO. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with a new product launch, ensuring full compliance with the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario AGCO regulations, particularly those pertaining to responsible gambling and advertising. A thorough risk assessment is crucial to prevent potential harm to consumers and avoid regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment that integrates AGCO regulations from the outset. This means identifying potential risks related to the new product's features, marketing, and operational procedures, and then developing specific mitigation strategies that align with AGCO guidelines on responsible gambling, advertising standards, and consumer protection. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical business practices, safeguarding both the company's reputation and its license to operate. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the launch without a thorough, regulation-informed risk assessment. This could manifest as a superficial review that overlooks key AGCO requirements, such as inadequate measures to prevent underage access or insufficient disclosure of gambling odds and risks. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct the risk assessment in isolation from AGCO regulations, focusing solely on business objectives without considering the specific legal and ethical obligations imposed by the regulator. This failure to integrate regulatory compliance into the risk assessment process is a direct contravention of professional duty and AGCO mandate, exposing the company to significant legal and reputational damage. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulatory landscape AGCO, in this case, relevant to the business activity. 2. Identifying all potential risks, both operational and regulatory. 3. Evaluating the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. 4. Developing and implementing robust mitigation strategies that are directly informed by regulatory requirements. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and mitigation plans to ensure ongoing compliance and adapt to evolving regulations or business practices. Question 19. The audit findings indicate that the Lucky Horseshoe Casino, a licensed AGCO gaming establishment, has implemented a new customer loyalty program that may inadvertently encourage increased play among vulnerable patrons. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the casino's management to address these findings? Option A. Issue a company-wide memo reminding staff about responsible gaming policies and continue with the loyalty program as planned. Option B. Focus on enhancing the program's marketing to highlight its benefits, assuming that increased customer engagement inherently reduces risk. Option C. Immediately suspend the loyalty program pending a full investigation by an external third party without conducting an initial internal assessment. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the loyalty program's design and potential impact on problem gambling, and develop targeted mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the loyalty program's design and potential impact on problem gambling, and develop targeted mitigation strategies. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breakdown in risk assessment procedures at AGCO licensed entity, the Lucky Horseshoe Casino. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate and decisive action to mitigate potential harm to the public and maintain the integrity of AGCO regulatory mandate. The casino's failure to adequately identify and address risks associated with its new loyalty program could lead to increased problem gambling, financial impropriety, or non-compliance with responsible gaming regulations. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for swift intervention with the operational realities of a licensed gaming establishment. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and immediate risk assessment review. This entails a thorough examination of the loyalty program's design, implementation, and operational impact, specifically focusing on how it might exacerbate problem gambling behaviors or create vulnerabilities for financial misconduct. This approach is right because it directly addresses the root cause of the audit findings by proactively identifying and evaluating potential risks. AGCO regulatory framework, particularly the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario (AGCO), Registrar's Standards for Gaming, mandates that licensees implement and maintain effective controls to prevent problem gambling and ensure financial integrity. A robust risk assessment is fundamental to demonstrating compliance with these standards. By initiating a detailed review, the casino is fulfilling its obligation to identify, assess, and manage risks, thereby protecting vulnerable individuals and upholding regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings as minor or to implement superficial changes without a deep understanding of the underlying risks. For instance, simply updating marketing materials without re-evaluating the program's mechanics would be a regulatory failure. This ignores the core issue of risk identification and mitigation, potentially leaving the casino exposed to continued noncompliance and harm. Another incorrect approach would be to delay a thorough review, citing operational pressures. This demonstrates a lack of commitment to responsible gaming and regulatory adherence, which is a direct contravention of the licensee's duty of care and AGCO expectations. Such delays could lead to escalating problems and more severe regulatory consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Acknowledging and thoroughly investigating all audit findings. 2. Conducting a detailed, evidence-based risk assessment that considers all potential negative impacts, particularly on vulnerable individuals. 3. Developing and implementing specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, smart mitigation strategies. 4. Continuously monitoring the effectiveness of these strategies and reporting findings to AGCO as required. This systematic approach ensures that risks are managed effectively and that the licensee operates in a manner consistent with AGCO regulatory objectives. Question 20. The audit findings indicate a potential integrity lapse by a key employee at BetSafe Ontario involving the alleged manipulation of betting data. What is the most appropriate initial step for BetSafe Ontario's compliance department to take in response to these findings? Option A. Report the findings directly to the AGCO without any internal review. Option B. Initiate a formal internal investigation to gather all relevant facts and evidence. Option C. Ignore the findings and monitor the employee's performance discreetly. Option D. Immediately suspend the employee pending a full investigation. The correct answer is D. Immediately suspend the employee pending a full investigation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the compliance officer to balance the immediate need to address a potential integrity issue with the company's operational continuity and the rights of its employees. The AGCO regulatory framework, particularly concerning responsible gambling and integrity in the gaming sector, places a high emphasis on proactive risk management and the reporting of suspicious activities. A failure to act decisively could expose the company, BetSafe Ontario, to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Conversely, an overly aggressive or unsubstantiated response could lead to employee grievances, legal challenges, and a breakdown in workplace trust. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective, and documented investigation into the audit findings. This aligns with the AGCO expectations for licensees to maintain robust internal controls and to investigate any potential breaches of integrity. By initiating a formal internal investigation, BetSafe Ontario demonstrates its commitment to upholding regulatory standards and addressing the identified risks. This process allows for the collection of evidence, the opportunity for the employee to respond, and the basis for informed decision-making regarding disciplinary action or further reporting, all while adhering to principles of fairness and due process. This methodical approach is crucial for demonstrating compliance and mitigating future risks. An incorrect approach would be to immediately suspend the employee without a proper investigation. This bypasses the necessary due diligence and could be seen as a punitive measure without sufficient grounds, potentially violating employment law and internal company policies. It fails to gather all relevant facts, which is a cornerstone of responsible risk assessment and regulatory compliance. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the audit findings and take no immediate action, hoping the issue resolves itself. This demonstrates a severe lack of diligence and a failure to proactively manage risks, directly contravening the AGCO mandate for licensees to maintain integrity. Such inaction could be interpreted as willful disregard for regulatory obligations, leading to severe penalties. A third incorrect approach would be to immediately report the findings to the AGCO without conducting any internal investigation. While transparency with the regulator is important, the AGCO expects licensees to undertake reasonable internal investigations to gather facts and assess the situation before escalating. Premature reporting without due diligence constrain regulatory resources and may not provide the regulator with a complete picture, potentially leading to an inefficient or misdirected regulatory response. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the regulatory requirements and potential risks. This involves 1. Acknowledging and documenting the reported issue. 2. Assessing the immediate risk and potential impact. 3. Initiating a fair and thorough investigation, gathering evidence and allowing for response. 4. Consulting relevant internal policies and legal counsel. 5. Making a decision based on the evidence and regulatory obligations. 6. Documenting all steps and decisions. 7. Reporting to the regulator if required by the findings and regulatory framework.